Tata, Sekwi, Awiji, Ayodali, Kagwila, Tami, Alosan, Kiwilibanganiba, Kwai, in Wingadom, Nami, Along, Kwai, in Wingadom.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
Oh, we're rolling, okay. Yeah, I'm Doug Bent, and we're here at the Koasek, the Koas garden, and we're shucking shell beans today to can. And these are beans that we've grown in the garden, and they did fairly well for the year that we've had. Of course, it would have done better if it was a little drier, but they're looking pretty good. So yeah, we'll be canning these in pint jars after we get them all shucked. And we're getting all kinds of help today from our young people and older people. Not meaning you, Shirley. No.
Hey Doug, did you tell us what kind of beans these were? Were they pole beans or bush beans?
Oh, these are the Vermont cranberry bean. And they're an excellent shell bean. And after you can them, and then when you go to use them, put them in a saucepan with a little milk and butter and salt and pepper and garlic, and heat them up, and they're delicious. They're pretty much cooked in the processing, when you process them in the canner, so they're pretty well cooked. All you're doing is heating them up and mixing them with some spices and some bread, butter, and milk. Yeah,
Would you consider these a heirloom seed or?
Yes, they are. Yeah, they're. Yeah, all the seeds that we grow here in the garden are either Abenaki or heirloom seeds. Yeah.
I'm just curious if anybody remembers eating these in their childhood.
Well, you can. Yeah, Shirley. Chief Shirley here ate them when she was growing up, or her mother and grandmother. Right?
Yep. And also Jeremy's family ate those.
Shirley, would your mom would she have canned these as well?
Oh yeah, she used to can a lot. Ask Jeremy how much she used to can. A lot.
Oh yeah.
Even when us kids were all grown up. So.
How many quarts a year you see?
Oh, she'd do it when all of us are home. I think it's over 1,000 quarts of stuff, not counting the stuff that she put in the freezer.
And potatoes.
Squash underneath the bed for the winter. They kept a lot better there than anywhere else.
They suck it up like nobody's business.
Right. It really surprises me how much they.
Well, think of it, even dried ones. So you can do dried ones, but you got to go through the soaking process.
Okay, Doug, tell us what going on.
Okay. So these are the shucks. We'll have boiling hot water that we will add to the jars. And then we'll put it in the oven for about 15 minutes to heat the beans and heat the jars before we put it in the pressure cooker. And in the pressure cooker, after it gets to 10 pounds, jiggling, 10 pounds of pressure, it'll be 40 minutes to 10 pounds before they're completely done.
We're using our own canner too, right?
What?
Because the can is bigger, you put more paints in it.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll go down. Okay, we got our jars full. And we'll bring them over here. Put our boiling water in there. Insert a knife in the jars because that'll dissipate some of the heat so they won't break the jar. And the water you want to fill just enough to cover the beans. I'll leave a little headspace.
Hello, can I get your picture? Can I get your picture with Mommy? Hi. Hi. You didn't get so big.
Hot water. Then we'll put it in the oven at 230 degrees for 15-20 minutes to heat everything up. And we'll be putting it into a hot canner, and that will get everything up to speed so it doesn't break it as well. The jars.
Want to make sure it's all sanitized too.
Yeah. We're heating our pressure cooker here with the water in the pressure cooker. We're getting that up to where that's boiling as well. And we have the lid on with a seal, and that steam coming up from the pressure cooker will help the gasket expand so it'll seal good. And so I guess that's it for now.
You got a towel?
Yeah,
A towel here, don't we?
Now we got our lid that we've heated. Let me put that down there. I'll take our lid down, put it on top. Let's see if we can do it. I have another pot holder, didn't I? Tighten the lid up. I'll put it in the cap. We've heated up our lids so they're nice and sterile and warm as well.
We got hot jars, hot lids,
Hot lid.
hot water on the cold beans. The only thing that started out cold was the beans.
Right. Nick.
And then you got the pressure cooker warming up too with enough water in the pressure cooker.
Yeah. We have a couple quarts of water in the pressure cooker.
A couple quarts of water in the pressure cooker. And then once you get these jars stacked in there, you're going to do a double row. Punch up.
Yeah, so we can get 9 pints in the bottom and 9 on top as well. So in that big pressure cooker, you can do 18 pints at one time.
And what is the pressure goes up to, what, 10 pounds?
Yeah, it'll be 10 pounds for 40 minutes.
10 pounds for 40 minutes. Wow.
Yes, and this is all organic as well. We don't use any chemical fertilizers, commercial fertilizers at all. And with these beans, you can also make, after they're cooked and processed, and you take them out of the jar, you can smash them up, and you can make refried beans. We use them as refried beans as well.
Yeah.
So you don't have to buy them in the store.
You're not adding anything to this. It's just straight hot water. And
Straight
beans.
hot water and beans. So put the second layer of pints in there. Once we get all the jars in there and the lid on the pressure cooker, it'll take it a while to come up to 10 pounds pressure. It takes a while to turn everything around. And then we'll put our gauge on. As I find it. There it is. And the gauge will have, it's 5, 10, and 15 pounds, so you want to make sure you get the 10 pounds. And set it right on top. And then I'll increase the heat on the pressure cooker to the high, so we come up to speed as quickly as possible. Then we...
Not quite yet. Okay.
So we can safely take the cover off now.
Actually, it was one of my, yes, because one of my teachers really came in for a presentation. She was like, would anyone like to work in the gardens? We're always looking for help. And I was like, I'm spending all of my time working. I would love to do, yeah, exactly.
And these will probably take like
those are pretty. Look at that.
half an hour, and they'll seal. You'll hear them pop, and they safely seal. Beautiful color.
So these are Vermont cranberry beans, harvested right here at the Koasek Koas Tribal Garden.
The fruits of our labor. And we'll just cover them up with a towel so they don't get a breeze on them and they don't cool too quickly. And that's it.
And that's it.
And that's
Made a recording this week. We went out to the tribal garden over in West Braintree, Vermont, the tribal garden of the Koasek Koas. And the following audio, we recorded a reading of a new book written by Abenaki Chief Shirley Hook. She's the chief of the Koasek Koas, and they have a council of chiefs. so she shares that role. The reading was done by Chief Shirley, Ben Gray, and Doug Bent, right at the tribal gardens while we were sitting amongst the blooming sunflowers. And the story is called Little Deer and the Sacred Corn. And it was produced with the help of Corongo Books and the production studio of Sarah Tucker and Patrick Texier. And Rick, could you read a little bit what's on the back cover to give us an idea of what the book is about and what the story is about?
I can and I will. All right. This is about Chief Shirley's book, Little Deer and the Sacred Corn. And it says, Little Deer is an Abenaki girl with a big responsibility. As keeper of the sacred corn, she tends the cornfield that provides her people with food through the long winter. One morning, she awakens to discover that thieves have plundered the field, stealing every last kernel of the sacred corn. Thus begins a time of scarcity and deprivation. When hunger forces her people to leave their homeland, Little Deer decides it is time to act. She sets off on a long journey alone to find the sacred corn and bring it home.
Okay, well, let's play the recording. It jumps right into the reading, and the first reader is Chief Shirley.
Should have got my sunglasses. Little Deer woke with a start. She was trembling from the cold, and she was scared. She rubbed her eyes to better focus. She tried to think about the night. It started out with beautiful stars in the Milky Way, and then something happened. What was it? Little Deer tried harder and harder to remember. Perhaps it was a bad dream. Little Deer dressed in a hurry and headed to the outside. Grandmother was at the fire making the morning meal. Something was wrong. Grandma was not singing. No one was singing. Little Deer stood for a moment in front of the fire, watching the flames rise and fall. She asked her grandmother why she was not singing, and everyone looked so sad. Grandmother hugged the little girl and told her that she would talk to her after the morning meal. Grandmother reminded Little Deer that she had time to do some of her morning chores. One of the chores was to gather wood for the day's cooking. Little Deer found some dry limbs that had fallen from the trees. She picked up the smallest pieces and put them in a basket. In no time, she had it overflowing. She lugged it back and placed it near the fire pit. Still more wood was needed, larger pieces that would burn longer. She picked up the large limb and dragged it back. It took her some time, but she finally had enough wood. Grandmother said that the morning meal would be a little late, so Little Deer gathered a container and headed for the gardens. She needed to walk a ways to get to the cornfield. As she walked, she hummed along to the birds and the animals of the forest. She stopped to fill the container by the water's edge. The gardens were beautiful with all sorts of beans, squash, and corn. The corn was her favorite. It was sacred to her people. Little Deer came to the cornfield, but to her dismay, there was no corn in sight. She ran into the field and went up one side and then down the other. Nothing was left. She slumped to the ground and sobbed. Little Deer had let her people down, for she was the keeper of the sacred corn. She was to protect it and take care of it as if it was her child. She had no idea what to do. Slowly she rose from the field and headed back to her grandmother. Grandmother was a very wise elder. She would know what to do. Little Deer walked past the water's edge and headed down the path to her people. They were all gathered around Grandmother, trying to understand the night before. Little Deer started to remember what she had heard and seen. It was terrifying. The beautiful night had turned into a dark, terrible night. The starry night had turned into a cold, black cloud that was churning up the waters and tearing up the fields. The black cloud took all the sacred corn without a trace. The rest of the field was torn up and crops were destroyed. Who would have done this? It must have been something for someone that was evil. With the winter arriving soon, her people had to do something. A plan was made to go south where it was warmer and food would be easier to find. It took a toll on her people, but somehow they survived. That day, Little Deer made a vow to herself and her grandmother that one day she would be the keeper of the Koas sacred corn once again. Little Deer and her people traveled many days to get to a new encampment. They knew as soon as they arrived they needed to make shelter first, find food, and make sure water was nearby. The tribe finally arrived at their destination, the perfect spot for a new encampment. Everyone who was able to work really hard on getting prepared for the upcoming winter. The shelter was built, wood was collected and brought to the encampment. Food was scarce, but the people of the dawn caught fish from the river and dried them by the fire. Wild game was harvested, such as deer, moose, rabbits, and squirrels. The days were getting shorter and colder. The geese and other birds were flying south to get to a warmer climate. Little Deer would watch them for a few moments and then would remember her vow to her grandmother. She had thought about her vow ever since the sacred corn was taken from her people.
My name is Ben Gray. I'm reading Little Deer and the Sacred Corn by Shirley Hook. Chief Shirley just read this first section. Thank you, Shirley. The first winter was really hard on Little Deer's family. However, they survived it, and it made them a stronger people. One day, a special tribal meeting was announced. The chief spoke with a heavy heart. Everyone wanted the same thing. They wanted to return to their homeland. The chief explained that without the corn, there would be a shortage of food once again. They had some bean seeds that were saved from other plantings, but that was not enough. It was announced that they would spend one more winter at the encampment. The silence was overwhelming. Slowly, everyone agreed to what the chief had said. Little Deer felt the tears sliding down her cheeks. She wiped them away for no one to see. It was time for her to take care of her vow to herself and her grandmother. Little Deer went to her grandmother to tell her what she needed to do, but her grandmother already knew. A single tear slid down her cheek, for she knew it was time. Grandmother had a leather bag that she wore around her neck. She slowly took it off and handed it to Little Deer. Inside, wrapped in soft leather, was a pair of earrings that Grandmother had made. They were a special pair of earrings made from tiny beads. They looked just like the sacred corn. They were beautiful. Grandmother explained the different colors that were put into the earrings. They'll protect you on your journey to find the sacred corn, she said. Grandmother also put together a leather bag that contained items that Little Deer would need on her journey. Grandmother gathered Little Deer into her arms and hugged her. She told her she loved her and would be waiting for her at the end of her journey. Little Deer told her grandmother she loved her and would be back. With that said, she turned and started to walk down the path towards the morning sun. It was hard for Little Deer to leave her beloved grandmother, but she knew she had to keep her promise to herself and her grandmother. Little Deer walked many miles that day, only stopping once in a while to have a drink from her gourd jug. That evening, she stopped and put us shelter for the night. Sleep did not come easy, for the noise of the night was loud. Little Deer tossed and turned for most of the night and finally fell into a deep sleep. She woke to something or someone walking nearby. She'd tried to be as quiet as possible. A tiny fawn came into view. Little Deer slowly emerged from her shelter, but the fawn just looked at her while eating the tiny tops of grass. Little Deer watched for a few moments as she ate at a bit of food that Grandmother had put into her bag. Little Deer went to the edge of the water and bent down to put water on her face. It was cold, but it refreshed her and brought a spark of hope into her being. The little fawn had made an exit to the worn path once more. It was time for Little Deer to go. She picked up her leather bag and headed up the trail. It was noon before she stopped, and it was getting to be a warm day. The spring had been later than normal, so it had been chilly. If it was too cold in the spring, the seeds would not grow. Feeling the warmth of the sun, she felt hopeful. Now her people would have a chance to grow their garden and have plenty of food for the winter. Little Deer's stomach started to growl, so she reached into her bag and pulled out some jerky that Grandmother had made. It was very good. And stopping the growling stomach, it stopped the growling stomach. Little Deer sat against a large tree and shut her eyes for a moment. At least that is what she thought, but it was later than that. The light was fading. She was upset with herself for sleeping like that. But in the back of her mind, she could hear her grandmother telling her that it was okay. You probably needed your sleep. You have a long journey to go. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Little Deer knew how long she had been walking. Every night, she would put a stitch into a special piece of leather with a handmade needle, one that her grandmother had made to remind her of this special journey. She had been walking for 3 months. Little Deer stopped by the edge of a river and caught some trout for her evening meal. It was really good. She put some green willow branches through it and cooked it over a small campfire. She saved some for the morning meal. A bed of moss would be her campsite for the night. It was soft and springy when she walked on it. It was like walking on a cloud. She thought that was what a cloud would feel like. Sleep came to her as soon as she hit her head on the moss. She was in dream time. She dreamed of her grandmother and her people. They were all smiling because the sacred corn was found. Little Deer woke with a start. She rubbed her eyes to get them into focus. She shook her head to get the cobwebs out. She sat up and looked around. The river was still rushing by and the birds were singing. She gathered her thoughts and slowly rose from the moss and headed to the river to splash her face. It felt good. She sat on the moss and ate her trout and watched the sunrise. It was stunning. It made her feel better about her journey. Little Deer walked for 3 more days and things started to change. The path, which had been very narrow, began to widen. That meant more people. She had to be careful. You never know who your enemy might be. She didn't start a campfire because someone might see the smoke. She ate some of the hardtack that was left in her bag. A few days later, with little food left, Little Deer stopped at a small stream. She drank deeply and splashed water on her face. She saw the fish jumping and decided that it would be a good place to rest for the night. She tried her luck at fishing and caught 4. That would be enough for the night meal and food for the next day. She found a comfortable spot inside a small cave-like formation, a perfect place to start a small fire and to sleep. Little Deer gathered some small dry pieces of wood and a couple of green willow sticks to use for cooking. It was a lovely night. The stars were shining brightly, and shooting stars were falling down on her. Finally, Little Deer fell asleep only to wake up a few times when the coyotes started to howl. They moved on quickly and continued their search for rodents. Little Deer woke before dawn and watched the night disappear and a new day arrive. It was going to be a beautiful day. The little brook gurgled and splashed, inviting Little Deer to come into the water and splash her face. She splashed her face and noticed that one of her treasured corn earrings was missing. What would she do if she had lost it? Little Deer was about to cry, but she knew that it wouldn't make any difference. The earring would still be lost. She spent most of the morning looking for it. She took the other earring out and placed it in the little leather bag. Her heart was heavy and sad. She knew she had to continue with her journey. She couldn't keep on searching. Little Deer gathered up her belongings and started walking. All she could think about was her lost earring. The day ended with a bit of rain and thunder. She had to find a place to keep out of the weather. She looked about and finally found a shelter that was suitable, another formation that protected her from the wind and rain. Placing her bag down, she thought about the evening meal. She still had a small amount of fish left and some jerky. The food was getting to be very low, to almost nothing. She hoped her journey would end soon. The next few days were hard on Little Deer. The weather changed overnight, and it was unbearable. The wind cut into her with rage. The rain did not let up, and the cold was unthinkable. She tried to keep going, but she knew she had to stop and find a place that would protect her from the weather. The rain was coming down so hard it felt like stings from 1,000 bees. She could not see. Little Deer fell to the ground, clutching her leather bag, and asked for guidance. She could hear Grandmother's voice. Grandmother told her to keep going, for shelter was close by. Don't give up. All at once, Little Deer could feel a difference in the weather. The rain slowed, and the wind was only a slight breeze. She slowly stood up and looked in all directions for suitable shelter. She walked a couple 100 feet and saw what might be a good place. She climbed over a few large boulders, and before her was a perfect shelter. The site was small, but it would work. She noticed a tiny pile of twigs in the corner of the shelter and hoped that it was dry enough to get a small fire going. Someone was watching over her. She thought about that for a moment. Grandmother said that the sacred corn earrings would protect her, and they did. The next section will be read by Elder Doug Bent.
Opening her leather bag, Little Deer pulled out the fire starter container and finally had a small blaze going. While she looked for more wood, she came across a patch of blackberries. They reminded her how hungry she was. She cupped her hand and filled it up, and then sat down to feed her hunger. The berry patch was very large. She picked and ate berries until she was full. Returning to her campsite, she rolled out her bedroll and lay down to sleep. The next morning dawned a new day. Little Deer woke with a start. She slowly sat up and rubbed her eyes. She could hear something. It sounded like someone was humming. Someone or something was walking, for she could hear the gravel crunching. She peered through a small opening in the rocks. There before her was an older lady who was picking berries and putting them into a basket. She was humming softly. It sounded like the song that her grandmother sang to her when she was little. It was an Abenaki song. Little Deer was not sure what to do. The elder looked harmless. Actually, she seemed like a nice person. Little Deer made the decision to talk to her. Perhaps she might help her. Slowly she stood up and said good morning to the elder. The elder didn't seem startled at all. She looked at Little Deer and smiled. She asked Little Deer's name and where she was from. They talked for a few minutes, and the elder asked if she would like to go to her place for the morning meal. Little Deer's eyes lit up. She was really hungry for food and conversation. The elder said her name was Shining Eagle, and she had gone on a journey many moons ago. She did not know where her people were. She lived alone. Slowly they walked up a little path and entered a willow structure. There were hides on the floor and the walls. A small fire burned in the center. A pot of food was bubbling on the fire. The smell made Little Deer really hungry. Shining Eagle handed Little Deer a bowl filled with gruel. Then she filled her own bowl, and they both sat down to eat. Little Deer ate quietly, enjoying every bit. Shining Eagle asked if she would like to stay for a few days. Little Eagle did not hesitate. She wanted to stay for a few days to rest up and enjoy the company of Shining Eagle. Little Deer and Shining Eagle spent the rest of the day picking berries and herbs for the winter. Little Deer gathered dry wood for the elder. It was getting more difficult for Shining Eagle to do the outside work. Little Deer asked her if she would like to stay a few days to gather her winter wood supply. A single tear rolled down the elder's weathered skin. She nodded yes. Little Deer gave her a hug and headed for the woods. She spent the whole day dragging wood to the willow structure. She didn't mind the hard work. She enjoyed it. She liked to help people. By the end of the day, there was an impressive amount of wood gathered. However, it was enough to get Shining Eagle through the winter. Shining Eagle made some hardtack and other food for Little Deer to take on her final journey. She knew that Little Deer would be leaving real soon, and she dreaded another winter by herself. Little Deer had not said too much about her journey to Shining Eagle. Perhaps she would talk to her about it before she left. That evening, Little Deer asked Shining Eagle if she would like to hear her story about the sacred corn. She put a few pieces of wood on the fire and sat down. This is where the story began. Shining Eagle listened to every word and did not interrupt Little Deer. It dawned on Shining Eagle that Little Deer was talking about her people's sacred corn. She could not believe that a person could have such greed in them. The story ended with Little Deer talking about the corn earring that her grandmother had made for her, and one earring that was lost and nowhere to be found. Shining Eagle rose from the floor, went to her altar, picked up a little leather pouch. She handed the pouch to Little Deer, who slowly opened it and pulled out a little piece of material. Inside was her sacred earring. Little Deer and Shining Eagle both had tears of joy on their faces. Shining Eagle had been picking berries and herbs when she found the earring near the river where Little Deer had stopped. I saw something shining, Shining Eagle said, and I went to pick it up. The colors in it were beautiful. Little Deer told her that the colors were to protect her on her journey. The two talked into the night. Little Deer wanting Shining Eagle to go back with her. Shining Eagle didn't want to be a burden. When morning came, Shining Eagle told Little Deer that she wanted to go back to her homeland. Food for the journey was prepared. Items that were needed were sorted out. Sacred items were gathered together. Another dawn broke through the clouds, a perfect day for traveling. The morning meal was set out, and the last of the sacred items was wrapped and gently put into a basket. The very last item was a seed pot that was given to Shining Eagle many moons ago. It was given to her by the chief. She picked it up, and it rattled. She tipped it and gently shook it. Out came some corn seed. Shining Eagle's chief had told her to protect the seeds in the pot, but she had not known that it was sacred corn. Tears of joy ran down the faces of the women. They put the sacred corn back into the seed pot, wrapped it in soft leather, and placed it gently into the basket. The sacred corn was going home. Little Deer and Shining Eagle traveled for 2 months. And at the end of their journey, they were tired but happy. When their people heard the story of the sacred corn, they were overjoyed. A celebration was planned, and everyone was invited. Word caught up with the greed trolls. They were sure to be there. They wanted every bit of the sacred corn. They'd made plans on how they were going to take the last of it. Celebration day finally arrived. The people were excited and happy. A dance was performed for everyone to enjoy. Then the presentation of the corn. Little Deer and Shining Eagle handed the seed pot to the chief. At that moment, the 2 trolls lunged at the chief, grabbed the seed pot, and fled to the nearby woods and disappeared. The people were stunned. Little Deer made a dash for the woods, hoping to find the evil ones, but they were nowhere in sight. She reached up and touched her earring, hoping that they would guide and protect her. All at once, a loud roar came from the sky above. It got louder and louder. The winds came up. The sky turned purple-black. Thunder and lightning raced across the sky. The roar shouted, "I have given you plenty of time to undo your evilness, but you keep on being greedy and evil. From now on, you will stand on the mighty mountain of Lost Nation, and you will protect the sacred corn forever." At that very moment, the 2 evil trolls turned into stone. The end.